Multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed when I was in 2007. First person to ever play Division I college football with multiple sclerosis. It's also one of the biggest fears that I have in my life is to go back to those starting grounds of having to do speech therapy all over again. Go back to those starting grounds of having to depend totally on other individuals to move my limbs and having to depend on other people to get me from point A to point B, or living in a wheelchair. Those are my realities because I've been in those situations. That's the reality of what could potentially happen to me. Last Saturday, I know my son had a track meet over by Reagan High School. As a patient of multiple sclerosis, you know the heat is not our friend and it can lead to relapses. And my body just started to lock up. My body, I couldn't move my limbs, and I felt that tingling sensation down the right side of my body, and I knew in that moment I was about to have an MS relapse. My son is unaware. He's on the track. He's about to run the third leg of his team's 4x100 meter team. I was all to myself and people were looking at me. They could hear the sounds of my crying after I was telling my son just before that, "I love you, son." I shouted it to the top of my lungs, and I told him, "Take your mark and you run this race to your best of your ability." From that point on, I hovered in my knees, put my hands in my knees, and I was crying uncontrollably. I know that in a matter of a couple of hours, I'm not going to be able to talk and I'm not going to be able to walk anymore. I ultimately ended up getting rushed to the hospital. Before I left, my son made it to the stands and I cried tears in my son's arms. My son, Messiah, who's 8 years old, had to hold his 35-year-old dad in his arms as I was weeping uncontrollably. And it was a surreal thing that I didn't understand till the end of it, but it was actually one of the best things that could have ever happened to our relationship. Because there aren't any times that I think my son could put down where he's seen his father cry. And it also taught me that as a man, there's a space for you to cry if you ever need to. So I was crying profusely in public eye for my son to see me and hold me, but I also recognized that it did something not only for my son to see his dad in human form, but it also did something for those kids that were out there who had never seen a man cry before either.